All right. So let's first talk about a couple different big features that are coming to Office 365, and these happen to be on the Teams side. So let's first start about the first one that really, any organization that is moving the Teams phone, and they may have legacy hardware, specifically handheld devices, desk phones, those types of things. This recently went GA, and that happens to be Teams SIP Gateway. And basically, this device or this capability of being able to take a lot of Cisco, Avaya, I should say systems, Poly, Yalink, and audio codes, legacy to the to Teams, right? And they're not Teams native. You have a lot of companies that have this, and so it gives them the ability to be able to reuse that hardware and not have to purchase anything else. Now, understand, this is not going to be the true Teams native device experience. However, it's going to give a lot of the companies what they really need, right? And it could be, just basic things like inbound and outbound calls, transfer, meeting dial in, dial out, right? Those types of things. Even do not disturb is going to be a part of this, and even accessing the voicemail. Things that you would expect like a desk phone to be able to do. This is not additional cost to be able to have that. And then there is an aka.ms there to be able to get to the blog post that was posted on this last week. It came due. So the other thing I feel that it's, especially on the Teams side, we have a lot of companies that are utilizing Teams meetings and phone. And one of the things that especially when I'm working with customers, they're asking about being able to access what's called real-time data for that particular phone. So in the past, a lot of organizations, they'd have to wait till after the meeting's done, then they jump in the Teams admin console and be able to take a look at what's going on. However, if it's a big deal, right, you could have C-level having an issue, or it's a pretty big meeting, you now have this capability, Teams real-time data analytics, to be able to jump in. Now, the biggest thing about this is, before this announcement, you would need to have the advanced communication license to be able to access this. Well, that is being removed. So you're not going to have to purchase a license to be able to do that. Now you can just utilize it with your E3, E5 SKUs that you have out there. So it's a great tool. There is a bit.ly there that you go ahead and click on that to get more information on that. So have fun with that. I think it's really a great support tool for a lot of organizations using meetings and phone. All right, so now, the message center announcements, I was going through this, and I don't know, it's the end of the year, and a lot of stuff is getting pushed out. So what I did is I really focused on the big ones that I thought make sense for this group, and then I do have one that's kind of like the other ones to keep in mind section. And then is, of course, the admin side and other big updates coming. So a lot of content, a lot of changes happening within the last month. All right, so first off, let's start on the SharePoint realm. So a lot of the SharePoint has been being updated from classic to modern for the last 3 years. And recently now we had calendar, I would say, went modern not that long ago. So now the lookup columns, if you're familiar with SharePoint, the capability of having a lookup column is also going modern. So you're going to be able to see that look and feel that you expect from the other parts of a SharePoint site. This is targeted for late November to mid-December for targeted release and standard, late December to early January, late January, I should say. But basically, it's nothing different. It's just the modern, that lookup column being in a modern look and feel. Biggest thing is, when this happens, just make sure your knowledge base is up to date so people aren't, and communicate that out so people are not caught off guard when that happens. Another SharePoint piece, and this is a big one, especially for those organizations who are utilizing something called Azure AD Dynamic Groups. And the idea of a dynamic group gives us the ability to set some rules to say, if somebody happens to be in this department and is a full-time person, and you maybe have a couple other things that you want to be able to look at, as long as those attributes are in Azure AD, then you can create a rule that automatically puts users in that. Now SharePoint can use those when doing audience targeting. This is not a security thing, but it is more around that audience targeting piece. So it's audience targeting really gives us that capability of saying, and if you're not familiar with it, in a SharePoint site on a page, if I only want to have, salespeople as opposed to managers see specific information, I can then say this dynamic group or this group, I can say they can see this, right? The one thing I want to keep in mind though, and anytime you're starting to get into the higher capabilities of Azure AD, you do have to have licenses to be able to support that. So this dynamic groups does require you having Azure AD Premium P1 licenses to be able to accomplish it. But this is a nice step in the right direction because I hated the fact is if I'm using a security group that's dynamic, right, and I wanted to audience target it, I just didn't have that capability until coming up here, right? It's already out. Again, another SharePoint Online one. Now you're getting more information in the admin console. As Microsoft is pushing a lot new capabilities within, say, Teams, right? So we have the ability to do Teams private channels, which creates a SharePoint site that's kind of related, but not really the same site. If you're also familiar with the connected sites that have been talked about and are coming down, that just gives us the ability to be able to have outside partners, right, go into a channel and it makes streamline that guest access piece, right? That's going to be another site. And so because of these sites now happening, they're changing the admin console to be able to reflect that information easier. So already starting to roll out now here in early December and going to late January. What's going to end up happening is a couple different things. You're going to be able to actually see in the admin console any SharePoint sites that also have what they're calling channel sites. And again, that's private. And then when released, that shared channel concept as well, right? Yeah, I'd agree. I like that because right now you can only do it through PowerShell. And not many people are up on a lot of the PowerShell stuff. So, and then you're able to do things like manage channel site storage limits, those types of things based off of that. So big change happening. So be watching for that in your tenant in the admin console. Another interesting thing, I read this, I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of a cool little deal. OneDrive and SharePoint, the markup ink for edit, for literally for images that you have in there. So say for instance, you're sharing on an image and the example you see here is, maybe you're thinking about how to be able to update your workstation and you're trying to get ideas from friends, right? So basically the images are stored in OneDrive or SharePoint. And then you can physically draw on those images using that markup tool. And that's highlighting, that's writing on it, that's even doing things like erasing things. So it gives you a little bit more ability to be able to notate on that particular image. That's already started here in December and going into late December. Continuing on SharePoint and OneDrive, this is a big change, guys. And I want you to really think about what's going to happen here. So normally you go into a SharePoint site, you click on the left-hand navigation to go to your document library. And then you're in that library. If you want to go to a different library, if it's not exposed, you have to go into site settings or view all site content to be able to see it that way. So what's happening is they're adding, when you go into the documents library, the main primary library, the default library within that SharePoint site, you're going to get a drop down right next to the document's title. And it's going to allow you to quickly navigate between all libraries within that SharePoint site. The same thing is going to also change a little bit on the OneDrive. So, on OneDrive, you have in your left-hand navigation the capability of being able to jump into a library there. Well, what it's going to do is, first, it's going to take you to the default library for that particular SharePoint site. And then from there, you'll still have that drop down. Eventually, they're going to also bring the ability to be able to do, this kind of connecting with OneDrive mobile app, but that's coming up a little bit later. But it's important. This is important. Make sure you have your knowledge base updated. Make sure your training is updated for your end users, because this is a quicker way to be able to navigate those libraries within the SharePoint site. Targeted release early mid-January, with a standard release mid-January to early February. All right, let's jump out of SharePoint and OneDrive for a second. Office 365. For those who are admins, what you're going to see is, and hang on one second, I just see Pete was asking a question. Will there be a limitation on the number of libraries visible in that dropdown? That's a great question. There was really not any information wrapped around that, Pete, and I haven't seen it in our back end yet. So we're going to have to probably follow up on that one. But nothing is saying that you're not going to see everything. And that would be crazy if you had like 50 different libraries in there. So that could be a very long list. So good possibility it's going to be limited. All right. So admins. This is rolled out and it's rolled out now. I mean, you have to go in here and look, but if you've gone into the service health area, there's a new section in here called issues in your environment that require action. And this is really for admins, right? Things like usage quota. I don't know about you, but when I was at a SharePoint admin, I should say a 365 admin, being able to track, sites and mailboxes and all that stuff that had usage quotas on them, and being able to track that down quickly, this is going to be a lot easier to be able to do that. Things like certificate expirations and service throttles, those types of things will also be popping in there, and they'll be adding more of these types of action items that you guys can do. Make sure your 365 admins are knowledgeable about this and update any process documentation. So that could be one way. You go to that dashboard, scan it, see what's going on, and then deal with it. But that should be part of your process now. One thing I really like, and I don't know about you, but I get a lot of Teams overload. And what I mean by Teams overload, I get a lot of notifications. I'm in anywhere between 30 and 40 different Microsoft Teams sites because of different projects that I'm working on here. So this is a relief to be able to do things like being able to say, hey, I don't want to see reactions in my notifications. Like somebody thumbs up something, great. I don't necessarily need to know that. So I have this capability. This is coming out in its public preview and rolling out here mid-December to late December. So coming fairly soon, if not already. It just, the capability has been there. It's just not a lot of people know about it. And so being able to go into that particular notification and then click on the ... and literally say, turn off all reactions. I don't need to see that in my notification area, right? It just makes it a lot easier to be able to clean things up. So that's for notifications for specific apps or reactions. Those are the two things that have been added to that capability. Again, in the Microsoft Teams world, pin your own video, which has been something that especially I know in the education space or the learning and development side, a lot of companies have been asking for this, where the ability to take this picture right now, my photo right now, be able to click on the ... and go pin for me. And what that's going to allow me to be able to do is then I can pin it so it's my first one on the far left-hand side, and then it makes it bigger. So right now I'm kind of small, but it actually makes it a bigger picture so I can see what's going on. Especially in the learning development side, you can see if they're actually talking using their hands, maybe they're pointing to something, then it makes it a little bit easier for them to see what's going on for their own, right? So that's I think it's a big, big deal for a lot of companies on that. Yeah, I would agree with it, Jason. I think that's important. All right. This one focuses on Teams rooms, and if you're not familiar with Teams room, there's two flavors of Teams rooms. There's Teams rooms on Windows, right? That's using Windows behind the scenes, and there's Teams rooms on Android. Android, I want to say I don't remember if it's already out or it's coming closely. It's coming. Android tends to beat Windows for some reason, but in this case, Windows is really working on this right now. So switching between multiple video cameras coming out here in mid-December. So within the Teams, Microsoft Teams Room app that you would have on that display, you have this ability to be able to change the camera if there are multiple cameras connected to the MTR in that particular room. So then you have an example, you see that screenshot on the far left top, and then you have this ability to go into the camera settings and change it. You also have, for the settings for the MTR, the ability to say which camera is the default. Admins device admins, Teams admins can go into the TAC or Teams admin console and can be able to configure via XML or in TAC which camera to use in there. Make sure that you guys are updating your end user knowledge base on this, as well as for your device admins to be able to manage those things and then include them in your process. All right, so this is what I was kind of talking about, the quick mentions. Again, there was a ton of stuff that came through, but just a couple of ones that you might want to know. For instance, the group icon changed, literally in Outlook Web. The section that's groups, the icon designated a group is going to change, right? So people may freak out because of that. Just keep that in mind. Send as a group by default. So we have this ability to be able to compose, reply all forward from the group ID now. And you can set that as the default action, right? So say, for instance, you have a sales group and you want to have them work out of a group, an email for a group. And so then they can set that up as their default. That's all they do all day long, right? So that makes it a lot easier, and it doesn't come across as their individual ID. It always comes across as that group ID. Some important things wrapped around enforcing policies for trusted documents. There was, I wouldn't say it's a glitch. However, it was more of in the past, if I had active content, and we're talking about macros and things that reach out behind the scenes in those documents, and they're trusted by the end user, even though they were blocked by IT, because the end user set it up first and IT blocked it later, they still ran them, right? That's changing now. So if somebody sets this, say, hey, yeah, I want to approve this and let it go out to the internet, and the IT admin comes back behind the scenes and says, no, you can't do that. Now the IT admin is going to win in this particular scenario. So it's going to take precedence with an end user. Some changes in SharePoint page authoring. I think that's something for you guys to look at. One I'm really kind of looking forward is to the isolated audio for NDI and hardware. This one is interesting because right now we already have that for video, right? So we already have that capability if I'm utilizing something like OBS and NDI to be able to separate the video out and be able to make a really interesting, setup for a town hall, say, for instance. But I have one audio stream. This adds that so I can separate the audio streams as much as possible. Some changes in the secure store to keep in mind in the Teams audit log. Sharing links that block download, that's specifically for videos. That's a huge one. And then Surface Hubs are going to be available in Teams Admin Center for you guys to be able to manage. Some big update ones. Again, some things to keep in mind. Huge changes for paging in large galleries, and that's only for a VDI scenario. So if you have virtual desktop through Citrix or those things, this is not rolling out to all of the versions, so make sure you look at that. Mirror My Video got pushed back, and encryption for Teams calling got pushed back. So a lot of these are changing the timeline when things get pushed. The one that kind of like, oh no, really? Music mode for Teams, that's at a high fidelity music mode. I wish that was going a little bit sooner, but I guess not. We're gonna have to wait for that one. And then some big admin ones you want to keep in mind. I keep on pushing the IE11 desktop app retires in 6 months. June 15th is that deadline, so make sure that we keep that in mind. I talked about the OneDrive sync, but I'm keeping it on here for now. Upcoming API changes we talked about in the past as well. Anti-malware, so there's some changes in here specifically wrapped around, because basically the anti-malware policies are being retired. So you need to use quarantine policies instead. So if you're still using the anti-malware policy, make sure you take a look at that and change those over as soon as possible. Content type syncing, if you're utilizing content type syncing, there's a new version of content type syncing that you need to make aware of. So make sure you check that one out. And then there's a big one. If you already have Teams phone deployed and you're using direct routing, there is a change in the security side of things, and they're moving everything to support TLS 1.2. I don't remember the one that they were using prior to that, but needs to make sure that you get that update and get going, or else you literally will have your phones shut down because that will not work because of the TLS requirement. All right, I think I got it all, Michelle.
I'm overwhelmed by the amount of information every time. It's like, wait, what? Wait, what? I'm going to have to go back to the message center, Don, and read up on a couple of those because, you know, besides like we cover high level pretty exhaustively, but what's great is that we keep on improving our messaging around the message center in regards to how do you do some of those things? Like, oh my gosh, this is not going to happen anymore. What do I do? How do I prepare?
Agreed.
You know,
and a lot of those messages have other links and other blog posts and things like that that direct you to the right location. So it's important to check those out. And then we're going to make sure all this information gets available to you after the meeting. So back to you.
Yep. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Great update. Like Don said, you know, December is when we push out so much. And so staying on top of the message center, you know, that's what we're trying to do here for you. As we heard that feedback, that's why we've added that now to our agenda every time. But now let's go ahead and move towards the topics. We're exactly on time, which is really rare. This month, we are the sponsor at the user group. We have taken a different approach probably for over a year and a half now. I think we're up to a few thousand we've been able to donate locally to charities in the Twin Cities. For those of you not from Minnesota, the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. This time we are donating $200 to the Susan G. Komen of Minnesota for cancer support and of course research. We're going to proudly going forward to continue to do this and support not only giving back to all of you as much as we can with good information and prizes, but equally giving back to our charities that we have voted on at our board and keep on circling them and cycling through those. So again, thank you everyone for attending. We love to be able to do this and to also give to you as well. So if you're not familiar and you're new to the user group, hopefully you'll keep coming back. Some of the reasons is that it's good topics. Maybe you like the speaker, or maybe you like just hearing the message center updates. But maybe there's a portion of you that says, hey, I want to win a gift card because Christmas is coming and I need an extra $100 that might just help my pocket for buying some gifts or even getting yourself something. So we, how our process works is that we send you the survey probably towards the end of the last speaker, because we have 2 every time, and fill out the survey as best you can. This is really all for you, and that's what, you know, our board members have volunteered their time for, is to give back to the community of what you need, what you hear. Many of us have been there, have been the global admin or the SharePoint admin or the Teams admin, trying to figure out all the things that are happening and even problems that you have. We'd love to hear it. Maybe we could find a speaker that will help solve that. So fill out that survey. Let us know how we do. Let us know what you need. And then from there, you get submitted into a list to possibly win one of $100 gift cards that we give out. So a total of 2 winners will be at the end of our event. With that, I love to move into the topics. Like I mentioned, I'm super excited to learn about Power Platform governance. And of course, what are the different flavors of Defender? We're going to first start off with Haniel, and I'll let him introduce himself as well as Chris. And again, everyone, thank you so much for attending, and feel free, ask questions. These speakers are here for you and giving their time back to the community. So with that, Haniel, are you all set?
Yeah, I'm all good.
All right, sounds great. I'll get off camera and let you lead. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm gonna just share my screen here.
And I love the shirt.
Had to go with it, right?
That's right.
Never fails. All right, you can see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Awesome. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I wish I could have been there today in person. Feel like I want to hug everybody around, but still got to wait a little bit longer. So hopefully next time we're going to have the event. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Haniel Croitoru. I'm going to be talking today about Power Platform governance. Power Platform is something I've been dabbling in since before it actually became a product. And I'm very much excited about the whole automation and simplification. My motto in life is, automate everything.
One question came up. They wanted to know if you were needing to share a screen or you're just doing your live intro with just yourself first.
No, I'm going to be just probably going off of camera soon and just going to be using the slides.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thank you.
I can get my clicker going. It's not cooperating. All right. So a bit about myself. So my name is Haniel Croitoru. I'm a consultant working at Protiviti. I'm an enterprise architect. I've got 3 girls. So needless to say, I got to automate a lot of things in life because everybody wants something else at the same time. So that's always kind of tricky. I'm in Microsoft MVP 5 times, initially coming from the Sharepoint space, but more recently moved into the business applications. I've been speaking and presenting and writing for many years now. I'm very much interested, with what Michelle was saying about giving back to the community, something I really much enjoy doing, which is one of the reasons I'm here today. Anybody who's interested in learning more about Office 365 and Agile, I actually published a book a couple of years ago on how to merge the two together, right? If you're running a project and you want to run it Agile using Office 365, or on the flip side, if you're trying to actually deploy Office 365 using Agile methodologies. So if you're interested in either of those, ping me or check out the book. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So automation has been a buzzword for a number of years, whether it is robotic process automation or intelligent automation or workflows. It's been around for many years. For those of you who come from the SharePoint space, right, you know about SharePoint Designer, maybe you know about Nintex. For those who are in the dynamic space, there used to be business process workflows there. So it's not a new topic, but it has become a very hot topic in the last few years. What's the big deal behind it? So the first thing is it saves us time. Needless to say, if we need to do something manually, the computer is going to do it much faster, pretty much guaranteed, unless there's something that requires user input. Another reason is to reduce waste. So it is 2021, but I'm still amazed that there's organizations where, let's say you want to do something simple like filling out a travel request. What it means is going to the internet, downloading a PDF, printing it, filling it out, scanning it in, emailing it to the manager who then has to print it out, sign it, scan it back in, and send it to HR. For those of you who are right now laughing, don't, because that is still the reality today. With automation, you can actually eliminate all this waste of paper and time by just having all the information flow from one person to the next and track the approvals and all that information online. Reducing risk. So I trust Michelle, but I know there's many other Michelles I know. And if I wanted to send something sensitive to her, my mistake, I send it to the wrong person. Once that information leaves my organization, it is gone. I cannot retrieve it. Those type of human errors can be reduced, if not eliminated, through automation. If you're trying to do something and send information to the incorrect person, the computer can actually catch it and say, hold on a second. This is not who it's supposed to go to and block the process. Growing your business.
Danielle? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I can't see any screens if you do have a deck. That's, I think hasn't yet pulled through. It could be our connection to you. I don't know if you even shared where you're from.
Let me check what's going on here because I did share it. Do you see it now?
Oh, there it is. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. You just missed the intro for the most part, so don't worry about that.
Well, and we had a storm in Minnesota over, the weekend. So from here connecting out to you in Canada, who knows?
Gotcha. Right. Okay. We actually got sun for a change, which is nice. So another reason is growing the business. So we talked about before saving time. So all those individuals who may have been involved in doing mundane, repetitive tasks, they now have free time on their hands. So they can actually use that time to now focus on revenue generating activities, building up their business, building up their personal skills rather than doing something simple. And then the last reason, or I shouldn't say the last, but another reason for automation is when there is no other option. So imagine you want to have the ability to give users access to see their employee profile, but you don't want them to see everything. So it's kind of like in SharePoint where you can set permissions and you can say, I want users to see one list, but not another list, or in the Dynamics world, you can control fields and you can control what data is visible. Sometimes you just want users to be able to query some data and get it back. So like, how many days vacation do I have left, and get that message sent back to them with the information that they want, but nothing else. So being able to control that kind of access is also a driver for automation. So automation is the question. Microsoft's answer to that question is the Power Platform, and by extension, there's also Logic apps and some other Azure workloads that I'm actually not going to focus today. I want to specifically focus on the Microsoft 365 Power Platform. The Power Platform is made up of today of 7 different components. We got Power BI, Powerapps, Power Automate. Under Power Automate, you actually have 2 different flavors, something called Power Automate Cloud, which are the workflows, and Power Automate Desktop, which is an RPA solution. Power Virtual Agents, which are your chatbots. And then underneath you have another layer, which is your data connectors that allows you to connect to hundreds of services. AI Builder, which adds another level of sophistication to your processes to make it even more robust and simpler. And Dataverse, which is think of it as a cloud-based database. So let's look at those in a little bit more detail. So Powerapps essentially allows you to build your human interface. So those are forms that can be, they're mobile first, so they're mobile friendly, responsive. You can make them as flexible as you want. There's actually 2 versions of them. There's something called a model-driven app, which is more based on the data, and everything is kind of nicely laid out based on your fields, or you have something called the Canvas app. And like a painter's canvas, you can make it look whichever way you want, rich with media. You can leverage functionality from your mobile devices, your GPS, your camera, other types of local storage. All those things are available to you automatically when you're building your Power Apps. You can share those and work with those either on the mobile device directly. You can embed them in your Microsoft Teams. You can embed them in your Sharepoint. You can embed them in another website. So a lot of flexibility available to you. And the beauty of it is that those connectors that I'm going to talk about in a moment, those are all available to you. The number says 300 plus. It's actually around 500 plus today. Dataverse, think of it as a database in the cloud, but rather than just managing your data, it has business logic, security down to the field level. It has actual business processes that can be predefined. And the Dataverse is based on something called the Common Data Model, which is a conglomerate of a number of companies that have come up with these standard entities that are available to you. So if you want to build a new solution using the Power Platform for a company, and you want to say, okay, I wanted to track information for a company. So there's something called an organization entity or organization table. The fields are already defined. The logic is defined. You don't have to do anything. All you have to say is, I want to use organization, and you're done. You want to use contacts. You have that available. So there's dozens of these entities available to you to save you a lot of time. Again, the whole idea behind the low code, no code, and saving you time to actually build your solution. As you define the fields, you put them on a form, and you have your model-driven app all ready to go. Again, no coding necessary. Then we have Power Automate. This is your workhorse. This is what does all of your processing of data. So you can connect again to hundreds. I got to fix my slide. The first one has 300. This one says 350. So again, the number is 500 connectors. You can connect to these services. You can draw the data into your workflows. You can manipulate the data in many ways. So think of it as almost like ETL, or extraction, transformation, and load. And then you can send the data. You can email. You can do approvals. All of those without writing any code. And so the other flavor of the Power Automate, as I said, is the Power Automate Desktop, which is your RPA solution. And this is where, if you're working with old legacy systems that may not have any sort of interfaces to work with, you can either create your own interfaces if the option is there, or you can build Power Automate Desktop solutions, which basically allows you to mimic user action. I open up a window, I click on a certain field, I copy the value of that field, I manipulate it in another way, send it to a workflow, et cetera, et cetera. So really it allows you to close that gap of how do I deal with the old green screen legacy systems or other types of systems that I cannot interface with directly using Power Automate. Then we have Power BI. Power BI essentially is a visualization tool that allows you to take your data from different sources, mash it up, and really make sense of the data, right? It's not just looking at bare numbers, but what's the meaning behind those numbers? And one of my favorite things is having the natural language interpretation inside of Power BI. So as Power BI starts to learn your language and you train it on it, people can start asking what if scenarios and really say, okay, if I know, Michelle mentioned the weather in Minneapolis, I can say, in 1995, what was the weather in Minneapolis compared to Toronto? If the data points are available, then Power BI would actually understand what I'm trying to do and provide me back with those results. Then we have AI Builder. AI Builder, as I said, is another layer of sophistication that sits on top of Powerapps, Power Automate. And what it allows you to do is do additional analysis, such as when you get an email, what is the tone of the email? Is the person happy? Are they sad? What's the sentiment? What language is it in? It's able to look at pictures and say, what am I looking at? In this case, you see there's a brown can and a green can. Is it maybe something else? So there's multiple models that are available out of the box. You've got business card reading, you've got invoice scanning. So those are available to you, but you can also build your own models and train the system on it. So that's where, rather than a person having to go, let's say, to a Power App and select the fields, AI Builder can actually pre-fill those fields for you. And then we have the data connections. And this is where I mentioned that today it sits at over 500 connections that go far beyond Microsoft. So whether you're working with Salesforce, or Oracle, or you're working with ServiceNow, there are so many of them that I can't start listing them all now. But it's important to realize that the interfaces that are used are using REST API and JSON, which is a very common platform used today for this kind of data interaction. In the worst case, you're dealing with a system that does not have a connector, you can build your own. And that is something that Power Platform provides to you, that functionality. Also, if you're working with some on-prem environment, DB2 or Oracle, SAP, even SharePoint on-prem, there's something called the data gateway, and it allows you to connect to your on-premise data sources and basically allow your workflows and your process to flow seamlessly to your on-prem environment. All right, so that's just the introduction of what is the Power Platform for those who don't know it. What are the areas of governance we're going to be looking at? And I'm going to be touching on those fairly quickly, just because there's a ton of information to touch on. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the governing body. Who are the people who are going to be interacting with the Power Platform and managing it on a day-by-day basis? We'll briefly touch on licensing, and by briefly I say one slide or two. We'll talk about security a little bit. How do you take your solutions and make them more secure so that you know what's happening? How do you monitor what's going on, right? And that's an important part, is that a lot of organizations are rolling out the Power Platform, and it's kind of like a Hail Mary, right? You put it out there and you hope everything's okay, but they're not following it or know what's happening. Then we'll talk a little bit about alerting, right? So monitoring is one thing, that's just you looking at it, but sometimes you want to be proactively notified by the system about what is happening. And that's where the alerting comes in. And then finally, we talk a little bit about application lifecycle management and how you actually build those solutions. Now, I could easily spend a whole day, maybe more, covering any one of those areas with workshops and lots of it. We don't have that much time, so I'm going to be flying through it. Michelle, if questions come up, feel free to interrupt me. I will try to answer those on the spot. Otherwise, I'm just going to be going through. I'm going to leave the deck behind if anybody wants to see it afterwards, or if you feel like you want to talk about any of this in more detail, feel free to reach out to me. Just going to turn on the screen so I can actually see the time.
All right, sounds good. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and of course, those who are brave enough, if you want to come off mute, interrupt and ask questions. I think Haniel, you're probably okay with that too, right?
Fully.
Okay.
Live theater, right? That's what this is all about. Okay, so let's start talking about the governing body. So if you think about it, and this is not just specific to the Power Platform, but Power Platform adopts a very similar model to other frameworks. So essentially, you're going to have two main bodies. You're going to have your tactical body, and then you have your strategic one. The tactical one is going to be broken down into your operational committee. These are the folks who are going to be monitoring what's happening day by day. If there's any changes that are happening to the service, make sure that your users get notified, make sure that if there's any issues around capacity or any sort of maintenance that needs to happen, they're the ones who want to make sure that everything is happening. They're keeping the lights on. The next one is your support committee. So this is where you're going to have typically your help desk, helping people when they run into any sort of issues, access. For example, if you have somebody who's trying to run something, they've not been granted access, that's where your support committee comes in. They're the first line of defense for your Power Platform. And then we have the strategic body. And this is where you're going to have members from your IT department, your security department, your business, sitting together and thinking about, okay, what does the Power Platform do for me today? What kind of problems am I trying to solve down the road that maybe the Power Platform can help with? And so there's going to be regular meetings that should be taking place with the governing body to ensure that the Power Platform is functioning as it should. The elements are working as they should. There's no issues. There's no failures. And forward thinking is, okay, what's the next thing for the Power Platform? How can we further automate things in the business? Break down any sort of roadblocks or bottlenecks that exist today. And that's in a nutshell. We can have an entire discussion for a long time around the specific roles, responsibilities of every one of those individuals. Now, specifically around the operations and the help desk, there are different types of Office 365 roles that exist in the Power Platform that you may want to assign to some of the users. The first one is the global admin. So like any other service, global admin has access to virtually everything in the platform, and it allows you to do everything. But typically, it's not recommended to assign global admin to users, only unless it's absolutely necessary, for example, to promote another user to an admin role. Then we have the Power Platform admin. That is the highest level of administration that exists in the Power Platform. It gives you full access to Dynamics 365, Powerapps, Power Automate, the data loss policies, anything that has to do with the Power Platform, you have full reins over that solution with that role. Dynamics 365 Service Admin, very similar. It also gives you full functionality over Dynamics 365, but it's a bit more limited in terms of the capabilities that you have inside the Power Platform. And then there's delegate admins. And delegate admins essentially is access that you would grant another user from outside who would be helping you with the Power Platform solution in this particular case. Now, you can have multiple people assigned to the roles. You can have one person. That is something that ideally should be defined. Typically, you want to have at least one person for the Power Platform admin role. And try, when possible, to leverage PIM, which is basically just making sure that access is limited. Privileged access is limited by a certain amount of time, because again, with those roles, you can do anything, but what it also means is that somebody who has access to it can inadvertently do something to have a negative effect. So for the governing body, the first thing you want to do is establish your body, establish who's going to be part of it. Make sure to be inclusive of the different elements, right? Sometimes I've seen this in organizations where governance is all about IT, they exclude the business. And then you're losing focus on really what's the purpose of the Power Platform. So IT is great at automating their processes, but they're sometimes leaving business behind, and they're like, no, you shouldn't be building anything, you shouldn't be automating anything. It's IT's responsibility, yet they're not including them in the discussions. So it's really important to have that overarching governing body that covers both areas. Assign the admin roles, as I said before, you should have at least one Power Platform admin, which should be separate from the global admin role. Leverage PIM, as I said before, so that you're limiting the amount of time that users are in that admin role, so it's not all the time. You might even want to have different accounts set up.
Haniel,
yeah.
When you say PIM, can you describe what that means? I think everyone might know what that acronym is.
Right. So PIM, which is essentially you get privilege access. So what happens is with PIM, you would log on to Azure and you say, okay, I'm now requesting to get Power Platform Service Admin role access. So I want to be promoted from a regular user or let's say I'm in the IT department, I want to be promoted to a Power Platform admin. And so what happens is I put in the request, there will be somebody on the other end who's going to receive the request, they will approve it, and depending on what that request, there's a predefined timeline. And as soon as they say they accept it or they approve it, I'm now granted that permission for that specific timeline, which might be 2 hours, 4 hours, depending on what the need is or what the organization defines. After that time, the access is immediately removed. I can then have to request it again if I wanted to continue working in that role. So again, it's just a safeguard that people are not using elevated permissions when not absolutely necessary. Okay.
Perfect.
Awesome. Let's move on to licensing. So I know this is a little bit of a scary slide, but I'm going to basically explain the parts of it. So if you are in a Office 365 tenant using enterprise licensing, with the Microsoft 365 licenses, you have access to the Power Platform. So a lot of people say, well, what do I need to start building Powerapps and Power Automate? I've got my E3, I've got my E5. The answer is nothing. You can start building things. Depending on what it is you're building, there's something called, remember those 500 plus connectors, there are some that are what are considered standard. Things like SharePoint, approvals, Outlook, what are some of the other basic ones? Groups. Those are basic functionality that is available to you. Once you start going into Azure, SQL, making custom connections, going to other kind of services, SaaS services, those are what are considered premium connectors. Once you go to premium connectors, you would have to get, depending on whether it's a Power App or an Automate workflow, you'd be going to the second tier. And this could be the Power User per user plan for Power Automate, per flow. For Powerapps, it's per app or per user. And that allows you to essentially build the roles that are, or sorry, the kind of solutions that require premium connections. Now, this has changed in October. So you'll see it might be hard to read on the screen, but for Powerapps, it used to be at $40 per user. It's now $20. For the per app, it used to be 10. It's now 5. So Microsoft, kudos, slashed the prices on that. What also happened very recently is they now released what is called pay per use. So as you start using those Powerapps and flows, you're only paying for what you're actually consuming. It's kind of like an Azure model. Now, depending on, again, if you want to build Power Automate workflows, RPA, there's a license for that. And then once you start going to the third tier, now you start getting into the more advanced things like I want to build unattended RPA models, or I want to include AI Builder where I need to, depending on my models, have certain consumption. Or I want to start building Power App portals, which are essentially like websites that users from outside can interact with. On the other side, we have our Power Virtual Agents. Those are the chatbots that we're building. And then Power BI, again, with E5, you get a basic license, but then you can also, for somebody who's got, let's say, E3 and needs Power BI licenses, you can add that on top. So there's a lot of flexibility to what you do, and it doesn't have to be that every user in the organization gets the same license. It really depends on what they need. In the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, you can actually see for specific users what licenses are assigned to them. And that is very important. You can do an export, review this information on a regular basis. And you want to review it. Sorry, we'll get to why you want to review it, but basically it's associated with cost. There's additional add-ons. So Dataverse, which is essentially a database, you get certain capacity out of the box. But what if you need to do more? What if you start creating millions and millions of records? You may have to buy more capacity. That's where your database storage capacity comes in. AI Builder, again, that's capacity based. As you build more models and you start using them, you may have to pay additional costs for the AI Builder. For Powerapps and Power Automate, there is something called an API call limit. So if there are certain workflows that will be running thousands and thousands of times a day, you may actually be reaching an API limit where you have to pay additional usage per day, or you may want to break it down in certain ways. Powerapps portals, as I said, that's consumption-based as well. It's essentially a website where if it's anonymous, it has one type of cost. If it's authenticated users, it has a different type of cost, but it's something that would be added on top of your Powerapps. Azure Virtual Agent, again, based on the session that you're using, you could be paying for. Azure B2B external collaboration. So if you're working with external parties, so let's say that you want to invite some guests into your organization from another company, they can access the Powerapps. It's possible, but you need to make sure that those users have an Azure B2B external collaboration license, and that carries a cost with it as well. So sometimes you got to think about, well, if I'm going to have so many users connecting so many times, let's say a month, does it make sense to just give them the regular Powerapps license plus Azure B2B, or does it make sense to maybe build a Powerapps portal and then have them access that way and log into the portal? So this is where you got to do some math and figure out what's the best way to manage it. And then we've got Office E3 or E5, and then you need that for audit logging and just basically general usage. Now, very important. By default, if you turned on your Power Platform, your users can go and start buying their own licenses. You might think, great, that's essentially their problem. They could start paying it with their own credit card. However, think about the scenario where a user is going to start signing up, building a solution, sharing it with other users. Now you have entire departments using these solutions. And then one day the employee says, by the way, this thing that I've built has now become mission critical for our department. Here's a $20,000 bill. Can you please pay it? If not, then the whole thing is just going to come down and you're essentially halting the process for the department. So my recommendation is this is something you want to control very closely, your cost, your licenses. So there's a way to disable that by default, and this is essentially how you do it. So basic recommendations for licensing. Licenses are not cheap. So what you want to do is review your licenses on a regular basis. So this is going to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center and just have a look at what licenses are there. Maybe some people have left the organization and you've never unassigned the licenses from them. The license is still there. That's taking up a license. Maybe there are some users who need to access something and they don't have the license they need, and all of a sudden they're going to start getting errors about access or it's going to force them to sign up for trials, and it gets messy. So make sure that you review your license needs on a regular basis. Now, it's possible to sign up for trial tenants or trial environments. Try to leverage those because those ones are free. For the first 30 days, you can spin up a tenant and start building things. It's not going to cost you anything. So it's recommended you do that because there's no cost to you, especially if it's going to be some experimental work or POC or throwaway. So consider that if money is a matter to you. Community plans are used for developers, so every user can sign up for the community plan. It is associated with their Office 365 account. So it's the same account, it's just a different environment that they can access, and they can start experimenting with the Power Platform. And as I said, disable the self-service access for your users, or is the self-service purchase of licenses. Now let's talk about security. Any questions about licenses before I move on, Michelle?
Looking at it, looks like we did just get one question. It's a really long question.
Okay.
Let's see, I'll try to cover it though. I've heard that it can be dangerous to allow individual users the ability to use flows in a production environment that they own instead of production flows being owned by a central body or user. I think they might be referring to service accounts. How do you create a culture where end users can do the experimentation as individual users, but then have flows reviewed and approved by a governance body prior to, in your production?
That's an excellent question. So I'm going to cover it in two parts. The first part is, and I'm going to cover this very soon, is prevent users from creating environments. Only IT should be able to do that. That's step one. Step number two, you're absolutely right. You should never have production workflows running under a user account. They should always be run under some sort of a service account, because if a user password is expired, if they leave the organization and you disable the account, you've effectively killed your workflow. or your process. So that's another thing. In terms of experimentation, so as I said before, by using the community environments, I'll go back to my slide. So there's the community plans that I was talking about right here. So the community plans allows a user to build their own workflows, but a community plan cannot be shared. It's only for that one user. And that's the good thing. It's the developer, it's their space. They can wreck it if they want to and recreate it. It's not going to impact anything. They can't be shared with others. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. That's a really good scenario. So whenever you talk about Power Platform, about building Power Apps and workflows and Dataverse and all that great stuff, you're always working in what are called environments. By default, you get something called the default environment. It's an environment that everybody has access to. All of your users. You cannot remove users. You cannot turn it off. You cannot delete it. You cannot do anything with it. That is an environment that is there to stay. And there's reasons for it. For example, if you're in Sharepoint, some of you might know that you have the ability to select a file and say, request sign off. Well, that actually runs a workflow. That workflow runs in your default environment. So that's why there's a reason why you have it, and that's the reason why you can't disable it or delete it or etc. When you create environments, you can create environments that include your database, the Dataverse instance, essentially a database, or without. Now, one thing that's really important about environments is they are geography bound. So when you create an environment, you can say, I'm in North America, sorry, US, where in the US, or I'm in Canada, or maybe somebody's in Europe. Once you create an environment for a geography, you cannot change the geography. So it's very important to know upfront what area, what geographic location you're actually creating it for. So if you have a multinational company and they want to build a solution, they have people in Europe and they're under GDPR regulatory compliance. They have to stay there. Data in the US has to stay in the US. You can actually create different environments, leverage the same Power App and workflow solutions, but the data will reside in different places. That's really important. Okay, and you can assign different users. So I can be, for example, in the Canadian tenant only, and then Michelle will be in the US tenant. She can't cross the border. I can't cross the border. My data is limited. My access is limited. There's different types of environments available. So we talked about the default one. Production, there was a question before. So production is essentially a separate environment that is rolled out. Unlike the default, the admins have full control. They can decide who has access to it. They can delete it if they need to. They can set up specific permissions. So, and that is what should only contain your production solutions. Now, in many cases, you're going to have more than one production environment by department, or maybe there is one specific process that is critical for the organization. You might want to set up an entire environment just for that one process, but then other processes might be sharing another environment. Then you have your sandbox. Sandbox essentially is used for testing. In some cases, it might be used for development by more than one individual. And with a sandbox, you can pull the switch and say, I want to reset. It blows everything away and resets it to its initial state. And then if you want to, you can actually take a sandbox environment and then flip it to become a production environment. So you have the benefit of using that. And that's what often happens is you start building in sandbox. Everything is verified. Everything is good. Flip the switch, you're now in production. Next time you want to build something, you go and you spin up another sandbox environment. And again, you have full control over who has access. The trial environments, those are for 30 days. You can spin one up, use it for your POCs, for your trials, for demos. Once it's gone, it's gone. The developer, that's the community plan one. So that's for an individual user. It can be shared, but it's a great place for users to really start getting into the, how to build and how to work with it. And then we have Dataverse for teams. Those are environments you can't actually manually build. What happens is when you're in teams, you can actually start building Power Platform solutions. The moment you start building it, behind the scene, Power Platform will generate an environment for you for that specific team. You can't back it out. You can't use it across teams. That is how it works. So those are the different types of environments available to you. So a few recommendations around the environments. The first one is your default one. Try to rename it to something so when people actually look at the list of environments, they understand that it's not intended to be used for something production. So something like personal productivity is a good name. Establish a process for requesting environments. So I said before, one thing you want to do is disable the ability for users to spin up their own environments. But what if they actually need one? What if there's a legit reason for it? So you can set up a process where a user can provide a name, maybe the approver, what is the reason for it, the type of data that's going to be there. Is it client data? Is it for a POC? And then based on that, the process can actually help generate the environment for them. Again, carefully select the geographic reasons. Once it's chosen, it cannot be changed. And then try to use the individual based tenants for any sort of proof of concept, just to make sure that your environment doesn't go out of control, where everybody starts creating environments, or production environments or sandboxes are used for individual testing. Restricting the creation of new trial tenants, that's something you want to do. So even with trials, you want to make sure that it's controlled, because it is tied to the account of your Microsoft 365 user. And then besides Power Platform, there's the environments. There's other things you can do in terms of your security. Least privilege access. So Power Platform does not set access to SharePoint. It does not set access to any one of your services. It will respect the access that has been granted. So if I build a Power App that says, show me all of my list items in a SharePoint list, if I don't have access to that SharePoint list, it's going to show me nothing. So it's really important to realize that you need to control both sides, the data end of it, as well as your Power Platform solutions. And typically you want to set it up so that it's the least amount of access available to your users. Networks access control. So you can set up inside of your environment so that certain websites can only be hit from within your network. You don't want your users accessing certain websites, like logging into Power Platform or running an app. If you want to only run it from internally, you can actually set it up so that it's going to block the user if they're using a corporate device from running it outside of the actual perimeters of the building. Location-based conditional access. You can also look at what device it's running on so that you can block the users. So there's a lot of parameters you can do, which are not specific to the Power Platform. There are things that run inside of Azure to really just lock down the security to say, okay, who's running it, where they run it from, and try to limit it as much as possible. Then we have another important topic, which is data loss prevention. So when it comes to the Power Platform, data loss prevention is all about the connectors. The connectors is what allow you to connect to the services, retrieve data, and write data. If you have access to the connector and you can authenticate to those services, you can perform those actions, assuming that you've been given access. However, at the organizational level, you can set up these policies, these data loss prevention policies that says that, okay, I have something called business data and I have non-business data. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social stuff is considered non-business. My SharePoint, my SQL, my Outlook is considered business data. So you can set up a policy that says business data and non-business data, keep them separate. If you start building a workflow that has a mix of the two, it's going to disable your workflow. If you're trying to build a Power App, it's not going to let you publish. It's going to say you can't, because you have to fix that collision, that problem. And that's a way to control data loss. So in your default environment, you can actually start removing a lot, like set up a policy to remove a lot of these connectors to say that, okay, I'm just going to give that bare minimum set so that users, there's going to be less likelihood of them building something that could have adverse effects or data loss. Now, there's something that I'm going to touch on a little bit. There's the Power Platform Center of Excellence, which is essentially a solution that was created by Microsoft to help manage the Power Platform. And in there, you can see what are your data loss prevention policies doing. In other words, if I were to roll out this one policy, am I going to break any workflows? And I've seen this happen where an organization, they're trying to be proactive and say, I'm going to introduce a data policy. They roll it out and they are flooded with emails saying, hey, all my stuff is broken now, because they didn't realize that they've just done that. So it's important to first review what they're going to do and make sure that it's not going to impact what's already in production. With Powerapps, it's a bit different. Once you publish a Power App, if you introduce a data loss prevention policy that goes against it, it's not going to impact that Power App until the next time you're trying to publish it. So it's important to realize that difference between Power Automate and Power Apps. Now,
I have a question
yeah,
that came in around Dataverse. Kirk wants to know, can you lock Dataverse to an app? They're having issues with using a SQL connector for their Power App because if they share it with a user, they can then use that connection to build their own apps against that connection and then alter the data in a way of the original app.
Interesting. So, okay, so they get a connection to the SQL through a legit app, and then they're building a secondary app using the same connection to get to the same data, but use it in a different way. I'm not aware of a way that you can limit it. Once you've got the connection, again, it comes down to Power App or Power Automate. It is respecting the access you have. I don't think that today it's possible to limit a connection based on a specific app. Once you've got the connection is shared across your apps and your workflows.
Yeah, I believe that's how I understand it too.
Yeah, there are other ways to do that. So tangentially. So what I do in that kind of a scenario is I would build, for example, a workflow or a Power App that makes a call to a workflow. The user has access only to that workflow. Behind the scene, there's this, and they can't see what that workflow does. All they can do is run that workflow. Behind the scene, that workflow is going to call another workflow, which actually has access to that SQL data. And it's that SQL data account that has that will return the data to the user or make the changes. And so the user will never know how is that access actually granted. So the user doesn't have access directly to SQL. It's the service account that does. And this is where, remember in one of my first slides where I said, you know, what's one of the reasons for automation? And my last reason was when there's no other option. This is a good example where you're trying to do data abstraction. You're trying to stop the user from accessing the actual data source. And the way that you do that is by having a workflow call another workflow, where it's that second one or child workflow would have access to the service account that then can access the data source. But the user itself can't. All they can do is just call that first workflow. I'd be happy to provide more. I don't have an example here, but I'd be happy to discuss that further if you want to connect with me afterwards. Okay. So in terms of access, so this is just a slide that kind of summarizes the idea behind citizen developer, the general users on the bottom right, bottom left quadrant. They have access to a limited amount of connectors and a limited amount of data. If you're trying to go up the vertical, this is now where they're going to be accessing additional connectors. So, for example, somebody in marketing needs to access Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever it might be. So you want to give that department, those users, specific access to other connectors. That's the vertical, the teal colored on the top left. Then you have the bottom right. This is where the same users may have the same basic connectors available, but they want to access more data. So for example, let's say one of the users is going to be building a dashboard where they need to pull data from the basic connectors like SharePoint and SQL, but let's say they want to build an organization-wide where they want to see, okay, what's the usage of SQL? They can actually go across not just a small amount of data, but all the data for that specific connector. And then you get the top right quadrant, which is essentially IT that has full reins on all the connectors and all the data to build the enterprise level solutions for you. All right, one thing that is often missed by organizations is there's something called an HTTP trigger. It's essentially a way to fire off workflow by just calling a URL. It's really powerful, it's great. However, there's no security on it out of the box. In other words, if I know the URL, I can just type it into a browser and call it, and it's going to run, or through Postman or any other service, and it's going to run the workflow. So you want to protect your workflow from somebody inadvertently calling it. There's two ways to do that, essentially. One way is when you're calling that trigger, you want to pass some information, like some sort of a secret a GUID or some sort of a message that the workflow will then check and say, is this a legit call or somebody just trying to spoof me? A better way of doing it is using something called Azure API management, which says, okay, where is this workflow being called? Is it called from my organizational URL, or is it coming from somewhere else that is not legit? And it can stop right there using the Azure API management. So that's a way for you to protect your HTTP triggers from being misfired. Sharing apps and flows. So I said this before. When you start sharing, you're sharing the app, sharing the flow. You're not sharing the data source. So it's really important that you remember to do the latter, because otherwise people are going to start saying, hey, something is wrong. It's not working for me. So just remember that. And again, if you're sharing it with external users, they're going to have the Azure B2B external collaboration license to use your Powerapps. On-premise gateway, I touched on that briefly. This is where you'll be able to access your data from that is stored on-prem through your cloud workflows and Powerapps, and it's going to be seamless once it's authenticated. Now, there was a question before. What happens if somebody's using a workflow and they start sharing it with other users? Anything that is enterprise level should never be run under a personal user account. So if you're going to have a single service account or multiple service accounts, that will depend on your specific scenario. It's better to use very complex passwords and make them not expire, or make them expire once in a very long time, than setting up every month an expiry, because what's going to happen is once the password expires, your connections are broken and things are going to stop working, and it becomes a big mess. Also, with the service accounts, it's better to not have MFA, because somebody's going to have to authenticate. There are some ways around it through Azure, but in some cases, it's better to just not have that. And also try to limit the login for those locations. So if it's a service account, you want to make sure that it's not going to be run by somebody on a different device, for example, that is not a corporate device. So for security and data loss, so restrict what environments are being used and what connectors are being used. Okay, separate your business from the non-business connectors. Make sure that all of your connections require authorization, and this is what I was talking about, the HTTP connector. And then make sure that you are sharing an app as well as the services that are leveraging the app. Okay. Review the connectors that are being used, and this is something that changes over time. So there's actually a workflow you can set up that will notify you whenever there's a new connector available. You want to review it and then decide, should it go into business, non-business, where should it go, which DLP policies does it apply to? Create a service accounts, again, which is better than using personal accounts. Avoid using a personal accounts when possible. Now, in terms of gateways, use them if you need to access on-prem data, but limit it so that your general users can't just go and create their own gateways, because it's just like they're using illegit data that is on their desktop or another computer and mixing that in with their corporate information. So you want to make sure that you're limiting that as well. And then you also want to restrict who can access the gateway. So not everybody should be able to access the gateway, even if it's created by IT. All right, let's talk about monitoring. So the next couple of sections, I'm going to go fast because I don't have a lot of time left. There is a lot of portals and sites available to allow you to track your general data usage. So with Dataverse, you can look at your users, you can look at the kind of data that is being accessed, which kind of entities, you can look at the plugins that are installed, the kind of API calls, gives you a good sense, especially if you're in the dynamics end of things, on really what's happening with my Dataverse and my data. You can also start tracking and logging down to the field level for every entity. Okay, this is something that your developers will control. It's good and it's bad. It's good in a sense that you can have full control of what's happening. You can see what's going on, but you're going to have to buy additional logging because logging is capacity in itself. So you're going to have to consider that in your cost planning. So this is something that you want to coordinate between your governing team and the people who are building the apps to make sure that you get just enough logging happening. For Powerapps, again, you have the Powerapps portal as well, where you can look at the analytics. And today it's the Powerapps admin portal, which really does a lot of it. For Powerapps, you can look at what apps are being used, where they're being called from, any sort of errors you're seeing. How are they performing? Are there certain lag points? You can just say, okay, well, maybe there's a certain part I need to look at it. This one's very slow, right? So general usage. App usage, which ones are being used? What connectors are being used, right? So maybe there's some connectors that were installed a while ago, they're third party, they're not being used anymore. Guess what? Get rid of them. It's another element of security that you're eliminating.
We got a question, Haniel.
Yeah.
Tom has an on-prem gateway that they run everything through. Is this a good idea to use one gateway only? And can we create a gateway cluster for high availability?
Typically, I haven't used the scenario of high availability clusters because typically when you run a workflow, it's going to ask you to connect to a gateway, not a cluster. So I don't think clustering is available yet for gateways. In terms of running everything through a single gateway, if all of the users, if it's always the same users, you could, but think of it this way. A single gateway means single point of failure. If anything happens to that gateway, everything that is on-prem goes down, versus having different gateways. And you can have a gateway running on a VM, so it's not like you need to buy extra hardware or anything. So you can break it down to have multiple gateways on VMs, and different gateways will have different workloads associated with them. Okay. So for Power Automate, you can look at things like the runs, the usage, who created them, the kind of errors, who it's being shared with. Again, similar data. Capacity, this is again with Dataverse. You can see what's being used, how much of it is being used, what kind of add-ons we have. Microsoft Teams capacity, so how much is actually Microsoft Teams using up from the data. And then with Azure monitoring, you can look at the kind of devices, the kind of OS, where is it being called from, number of sessions. So this is outside of your Power Platform, but it is related to the actual calls that are being made. And then in the security, you can actually leverage Power Automate and Powerapps to build using workflows. Sorry, different slide. You can use your auditing inside of your compliance center to look at certain events that are happening. Is somebody creating workflow or editing or sharing? So going back to the question before about, what if somebody builds a workflow and shares it with other people in the organization and it's running under their own account? You can actually build a workflow that would use edit permissions, right? So you can set up a webhook that says whenever somebody edits permissions on a workflow, send a notification to IT, or actually go and remove the permissions and say, if the environment that this workflow is in is the default environment, remove the additional users and send the user an email saying you're not allowed to share workflows with anybody else in the default environment. So you can actually do that, not to prevent, but to do the cleanup for them. So there's ways to do that. And then the logging is stored for 60 days in your SIEM. 90 days, and then if you need to take it off, you can, in your logs, and then you can download it into a SIEM if you need to keep it for longer periods of time. Virtual agent, it's not really a log, it just shows you how it's being used, if there's opportunities for improvement. And then it's the Power Center of Excellence, Power Platform. So this is something you can install. There's a number of steps for it, but it gives you a lot of data around what is installed, how it's being used, where it's being used, sort of errors, DLP, all of that in a whole package. So I urge you to take a look at that as well. The service health, that's basically where you can see if there's any open tickets, you can submit tickets. So basically on a regular basis, monitoring is only good if you're actually going into these portals and reviewing the data. If you're not going in there, then obviously it's not going to do anything for you. So make sure that on a regular basis, you're going in and reviewing the logs. All right, quickly alerting. So there's for PowerShell, there's a module, and also in Power Automate, in Powerapps and Power Automate, there are connectors, and they allow you to perform a lot of the actions, such as adding, creating, deleting, managing permissions, all on the Power Platform. So you can actually create alerts, like I mentioned before, with the unified log, where if somebody goes and creates something or does something that's not valid, remove permissions, notify somebody, delete. You can do all of those using the connectors and using the PowerShell library that's available. So that's just a quick glimpse of the options you have. Lifecycle management, I'm probably going to just very quickly talk about. So you can set up templates that you can share, and this is where you want to start building some best practices for the organization of how is the Power Platform going to be used, how are solutions being built, so that they're not just starting with whatever they want, but something that is being reviewed by IT is, okay, this is how you should be building your solutions. In terms of environments, so this is what I said before, where when you're building a solution, you're going to have multiple developers. Every developer is going to have their own environment. Using something like Azure DevOps or some other code management system, you want to be able to then promote everything into a single sandbox. Now this is where your testers will have access to. They will be reviewing the solution. If that looks good, have a secondary sandbox. This is where your users will go in to test the solution for UAT. And once everything is approved, you then roll the solution into production, and that environment becomes your production environment. If at any point something is broken, goes back to the developers, they fix the bugs, redeploy the sandbox, and you repeat the cycle. One of the last things I want to talk about is the solution. So when you're building your workflows, your Powerapps, whatever it is, try to leverage solutions as much as possible. Solutions is essentially a way for you to package what you're doing. And there's something called a managed and unmanaged solution. Managed means that if you're given a managed solution, you cannot modify what's in it. You can build on top of it and enhance it, but you cannot modify the core. If it's unmanaged, that's really what the developers are going to be working with. So Microsoft provides you with a number of managed solutions out of the box. Those are the ones I talked about before with the different entities and information. You can then start building your unmanaged solution on top of it. So you can have solution A, it has different versions, and you start patching it. And then over time, you create another version of it, version 2, which then rolls all the patches into it. And then that is what is going to be given to the business or installed in a different environment. And if they need to make changes, they can then build another unmanaged layer on top of it. From this bottom-up approach is how you want to be managing your solutions so that people are not going to be just mucking around and say, oh, you know, I need owner access. Somebody's giving access. They start changing it, breaking something for somebody else. So you want to make sure that you're following kind of application lifecycle management processes for that. So just quickly to wrap that up. So you want to follow best practices for standards for building the solutions, deploying the solutions, try to leverage the dev environments, like I said before, to save some costs and avoid people building something that, you know, inadvertently gets promoted. And then use a source control system like Azure DevOps. And also there's something called a solution packager. And this is where you want to test your solution for any dependencies, anything else to make sure that it's not broken. And we talked about the different environments. That's it. I think I might have run a bit over time, so apologies.
No, no worries. We actually have the next speaker has a question for you, so
Yes.
I'm gonna lean into his time, and then there's one more, and that's okay. I think it's totally fine. We're certainly relaxed here. So fantastic. That was so much information. I wish I could slow it down, or have you on probably a workshop where you've got a 90-minute and a lot more time. But so Chris is asking, he has a customer who has about approximately 20 flows with 80 plus solutions, and the Power Automate portal doesn't allow you to easily identify what solutions are tied to which flows. Do you have any tips or tricks, or do you know where you can easily figure this out?
So the best way to do that is using either PowerShell or the Power Automate workflows. And that allows you to, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge because what happens is there are workflows that are like admin workflows that says, you know, get me a list of all the workflows. And even when you make yourself the admin, the moment that a workflow is what is called solution aware, it belongs to a solution, you can't really find out anything about it. What you need to do is you need to go to the environment, you need to become an owner of the environment, and then you can see all the details about those workflows. There's no simple automated way to say, okay, I want to become an owner of all the solution, all the environments and all the solutions in them. You actually, one way to do this is to use an app account and add the app accounts to every single environment. So there's a whole process. I'm actually doing, this is part of what I do at Protiviti, is there's a Power Platform assessment that I do, and I run through the entire Power Platform, picking up all the workflows and all the Power Apps and looking for any issues and any failures and everything like that. And that is one of the areas that often is a challenge for organizations, is like, how do I know what's happening? What's belongs to which solution? So there's no simple answer. The best thing to do right now is try to use the Power Automate connector for that.
I thought you were able to do it in the Power Platform Center of Excellence, but I haven't looked at that in a while.
Okay, it could be, but
yeah, they have so much stats in there that you are able to look at, how many apps are being used by what flows and so forth. So that might be another way for you. So I have one last question, and I'm going to address it for both of you because I think you both might have some different and unique answers. The question is from Jason. It sounds like Power Platform should really be approached as a separate platform, in quotes, maybe dedicated admin team, development, BAs and so forth. What have you guys seen? Because you're both consultants, you both are working with several different industries. Love to hear what you've seen out there.
So first of all, Chris, I invite you to go off mute and join me on this. But when you're saying separate, Jason, when you're saying a separate environment or separate service and separate governance team, what do you mean by separate? Separate from what? Separate from Microsoft 365 or what?
Yeah, we kind of had a few discussions about the Power Platform in our company, but right now we only have basically 2 people who are adminning the entire M365 platform.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just trying to convince the business that if that's something you're interested in, we need additional people to man that because it is a separate platform. And so I think there's kind of, we get a little frustrated sometimes with how the marketing comes out where it just says anyone can use it. It's low code. It's easy to do, but they don't really they don't really message the caveats to, but it does need to be governed. And so end users kind of get these marketing pieces and they just right away want to turn everything on and they don't understand that it's not a good idea to do that. So
right. So I would say that, and again, this is my personal opinion, that Power Platform is no different from Teams. It's no different from Dynamics. It's no different from Azure or other services. The users and the individuals who are responsible to manage it are the people who should be making up the governance team for it. So in your case or in your client's case, it might be 2 individuals. At Protiviti, we have a team of about, let's say, 20 IT people. Some focus only on Azure. They will make up the Azure governance team. We have 3 individuals who are managing Power Platform. Those are the IT individuals who make up the Power Platform Center governance body plus the business. So my opinion is it definitely it does not have to be the same people. It could be the same people, but there's no rule that says, whoever does Microsoft 365 has to do everything under Microsoft 365 in terms of governance, because the needs are different, the tool set is different, the skills are different, the business users may be different, right? So there's many drivers that could say, okay, why would you want to have somebody who's involved with virtual machines and platform as a service, and then you have other users who are talking about an HR, vacation approval process and vacation process and other types of processes, completely like vast different areas. Why would you want to have the same people in the same governing meeting? They're not related. Chris, what do you think?
So I'll chime in with my 2 cents. So at concurrency, the way that we look at Powerapps is kind of under that same umbrella as, let's say, Sharepoint. And like you said, governance is important. Does everyone remember when Office 365 groups came out and how those were automatically turned on for everyone and what kind of a governance nightmare that became for everyone? And so now Microsoft has it turned off. And there's a lot of organizations that we work with that actually have a governance process where you do a ServiceNow request. It goes through this workflow. It's approved by a governance team, and then it's set up. Its permissions are created. So it really just depends on the collaboration style and the organization style as to how you want to govern. But you definitely, with anything Microsoft 365, always start with governance. Start with governance before you do your deployments. It's going to make your life easier.
Yeah. And I'll just say one kind of closing statement before I drop off or I go off video. So a lot of what I've seen organizations do, and you're absolutely right about the messaging of, it's low code, no code, so start using it, is that's exactly what organizations are doing. They're saying, oh, it's low code, not a problem, just start using it, we'll figure it out. And so what I find is that when I want to speak with organizations about doing governance, I find myself saying, well, before I do governance, let's first of all find out what kind of a mess you're in already. And sometimes it's a deep rabbit hole that organizations get themselves into, where they have people who are building a bunch of stuff that's already running production, sending data outside, users have left the organization, workflows running orphaned without any owners. They don't know, like, everything that can go wrong. I find sometimes within a few months, it's I don't know why, but it's a big mess very quickly. So,
awesome.
anyways,
Well, thank you, Haniel. And the wonderful thing, this is recorded, so if you do want to slow it down and kind of piecemeal all the great information, you definitely have access to that. Thank you from us in Minnesota to you out in Toronto, Haniel. Are you planning to stay on to help answer maybe any more questions?
I do have another call I have to get to, but if for whatever reason I'm not on and you have any questions, I've left my contact information online, or reach out to Michelle. She can relay information to me. I'm always happy to continue the conversation. Answer any questions you might have.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. And Chris, good luck. Over to you.
Thank you, Haniel. That was an awesome presentation. I tend to learn more and more about Power Automate all the time, just as it's continuing to converge in a lot of stuff that, it lives in the Microsoft 365 space.
Yeah.
So great information.
It's growing like wildfire. I find it's like every day. Even myself, if I don't stay on top of all the social media for a week, that's it. Like there's something I've missed. So yeah.
That's
all right.
The joys of a greenfield product like Microsoft 365.
Yeah.
And that amazing backlog of new features that was discussed early on in the meeting.
That's right.
So I appreciate being back here. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Microsoft 365 user group here in Minnesota. I am actually here in Minnesota, in Rosemont. I work at Concurrency as one of the solution architects, as well as what most organizations would consider a practice lead. We call them capability leads. And so the capability group that I oversee is Secure Modern Workplace, which, as we start to look at some information on the 20 years of my career in consulting and working at Concurrency, we kind of look at it as identity, collaboration, security, and compliance, and endpoint management are those key pillars. And so obviously the discussion today, when it comes to Defender, really does touch a lot of those little pieces. So I'm excited to share about this. Just a little bit about me. Not only the only thing I've been doing longer than consulting is actually being married to my lovely wife. My oldest son is just turned 18 this weekend, so that was a huge milestone in our lives. Plus, he's finishing high school. He's at the Rosemont High School and part of their marching band. So it's been a busy year here at our Blackburn household. And besides IT, my passion outside of just the technology really is in music. And so when I'm not doing IT, I'm doing music, I DJ, and I'm a foodie, which you'll find out throughout the course of this presentation. I love traveling and love trying new cuisines. And so that really kind of takes us into the discussion around Defender. And you're going to find that the topic of this conversation really of what kind of flavor of Defender that you want to deploy. Really, you want to take a look at it from the high level. What is really in that Microsoft 365 Defender suite? And it's made up of, as I like to say, cuisines. We've got email, so that's part of the Defender for Office 365. Identity, so you've got the Defender for Identity. Yes, I did not update this to say Microsoft Defender for Apps. So I still have Cloud App Security on there, but it's that product as well as that Microsoft Defender for Endpoint product that rounds out that whole suite. And so where we're going to spend time this afternoon and really talking about is the Defender for Endpoint Suite. And with that Defender for Endpoint Suite, I like to say can prepare to be a little different in each organization. Organizations tend to have those deployment maturity curves in terms of how they are implementing those pieces of the Defender Suite. As we like to look at it, it's really the EDR components, threat and vulnerability management, that next generation protection, attack surface reduction, the automatic investigation, and the threat hunting service. So those are really at the core of that cloud-based service that is enabled when you turn that on the machines, and it lives in conjunction with that native Microsoft Defender for antivirus component. And what we'll dig into a little bit this afternoon as well is as we are taking each of those different flavors, we're serving it up, though we look at the core platforms that suite is enabled on. Obviously, PC is the most common, but we also have mobile is shortly behind that, as well as Mac, Linux, and servers. So those are some key pieces that we'll get into some caveats on how those are actually enabled and deployed and managed as part of this particular discussion. And then with the Defender Suite, you could do the full 6-course meal, which we'll talk about, or you could have the appetizers. So different pieces of it you can take and you can serve it up as much as you like. We see it a lot with pilot deployments. We see it with the continued hardening of devices, and as organizations start to go down that modern management path. Really, those are some of those key pieces that we see them starting to enable more and more of those items that were discussed. Pause here for a second and see any questions. Which one is like buttered popcorn? I have to think about that one. The Mike and Ike's, I'd say it's probably going to be controlled folder access. So that's the most, I would say, most troublesome one that customers run into, not knowing exactly what happens when you turn that on. It's very overreaching in terms of what all it's locking down. It is, I would say, a North Star that organizations should move to, as a lot of them have started to embrace not giving local admin access to their users. That's something that was a big habit that I saw in a lot of organizations, going from XP to Windows 7, and then making that move off of Windows 7. That's when we started to see that paradigm shift of removing that level of access. So let's dig in and let's talk about the recipe that goes into a successful Defender deployment. Really, it boils down to looking at your architecture that's in your environment, figuring out and discussing as an organization what deployment method that you want to use, and configuring those capabilities. Yes, you can deploy it with that little script that's out on the Defender portal, but I'll talk about why you don't want to do that in an enterprise rollout. And in a lot of organizations, we still see that Endpoint Manager on-prem is still key, SCCM. So in working with customers, yes, I would love to have them all in Intune yesterday and doing modern management yesterday, but it's a big paradigm shift. And so that's why we have this discussion of looking at that architecture and saying, okay, are we going to deploy Defender with Configuration Manager, or is this the right time to make that step and move forward into that Intune space? Because they do make it really, really easy. And so, having that architecture identified, and once you have that architecture identified and how you want to deploy it, you pick which method will work well for you. I have customers that are doing it with GPOs. I have customers that are doing it through Endpoint Manager in the cloud and on-prem. I even have some with scripts just based off of their systems management platform. So there's no wrong way to do it, because each recipe will be a little bit different based off of your organization styles. And then the capabilities. We'll talk a little bit about the intricacies of those over and above your native endpoint detection and response. What do you really get with the next generation protection? And one of the key topics that I'm actually having a lot of discussions with customers here recently is around attack surface reduction and what that means. I'll probably actually blog about it. I've got almost all of it ready to publish on my website, which it's at the beginning of this presentation, which I'll share after we get through and let Michelle circulate that out to the community. So digging in a little bit more as we talk about the appetizers or the 6-course meal, again, like I said, there's no wrong combination in your environment. We still have lots of customers that are happy with their CrowdStrikes or their silences, or are making that move off of those because they've invested in E5. And so looking at how you want to consume Defender is important in terms of looking at the levels of protection, whether you're going to go full in with Defender being in active mode, whether it's going to be in passive mode, or whether you decide you want to disable it altogether, which you can do. And then taking it that next step further, that enhanced detection and response in block mode, there are some caveats to that as well. So looking at the full suite and determining which features you want is a journey. You know, sometimes it's you can jump right in, or you can turn on just getting that sensor data up to Defender, getting some of the EDR components, looking at the threat and vulnerability management, and then turning on some of those more Windows-based controlled capabilities. So in terms of looking at what would I consider that full 6-course meal with Defender and all of its capabilities, you know, of course, the first one is that endpoint detection and response. You know, some of the key pieces of that is you get the enhanced, the advanced hunting capabilities, which allows you to do some of the query-based KQL there in the Defender portal, and being able to actually take advantage of the technical community and a lot of the scripts that Microsoft is providing for you, where you don't have to be very familiar with KQL. Now, there's a lot of scripts out there. You just simply go into the portal, you go into the queries, and you can pick one. Probably one that you're thinking of wanting to run in your environment. There's probably one that already exists out there. And so one of the things that you have to keep in mind as well, just kind of a small caveat, is to have EDR in block mode, you do have to have cloud-enabled protection turned on. And so that is the policy that you see down in the bottom left corner. That's essentially, I think there's 2 options in there. It's either on or off in terms of how you enable it within Intune. Inside of SCCM, that's going to be what you considered maps. So if you look at the anti-malware policy in SCCM, configman, you can see that is the feature you turn that on that enables that cloud-enabled protection. So that way it sends that data real time to Microsoft 365, and it's able to churn through that information to take advantage of that AI and see if there's any abnormal behaviors on the machine. And to take this a step further, this was one of the cool features that even myself, you know, having deployed Defender over the last, I'd say, 2 years, this was one that I have been I'd say educating customers about, is that capability of live response. Yes, it's super cool that Endpoint Manager in the cloud has just released a public preview, the remote help feature, but what if you don't want to connect to an endpoint? What if you don't want to take over a customer's screen? What if you wanted to run some commands just to get some data back from a machine in the case of maybe there was a threat, or maybe you're just looking to see what performance is like? Live response is a super cool E5 feature that, or P2 feature that does come with the Defender for Endpoint suite, where you can turn it on. You can even opt to allow running some custom built scripts that you may have created to do some real-time analysis, and you can actually pull those queries and run them against a machine remotely, kind of like an old Dameware type of tool where you're able to connect to that machine and pull some of the data. And it's what makes it even sweeter is there's now public preview support for Mac and Linux as well. So you can do live response connectivity into a Mac or Linux machine as well as PC. The second piece is, I think one of the most important is really that threat and vulnerability management dashboard. Think of it as kind of that Rapid7 I don't like saying competitor, but really is a lot of those capabilities where it looks at the health of your machine to see, are there CVEs that could potentially put that machine at risk based on software that's installed? How can you continue to tweak the configuration of those machines to make them more hardened and more secure? That's where the threat and vulnerability management dashboard in conjunction with the configuration score will really give you visibility into how you can improve the posture of managing the security on your endpoints. So yes, it's a great EDR tool, but over and above, it allows you to have that 10,000 all the way down to 100-foot view of your environment in your machines. And so the next piece that obviously is at the heart of it, kind of that the old traditional Defender for antivirus core, and that since, I forget the last two letters, but there's a since executable as well, that if you look in Task Manager and see it running, those are really at the heart of those capabilities that provide you that anti-malware and next generation protection. And so this is, along with turning on cloud-enabled protection, this is really those key components within the Defender portal up in security.microsoft.com that you can turn on. And these are at the heart of what you'll see as part of that next generation protection, where it will check the metadata in the cloud for executables to see if it's a known bad executable or application or script. It provides you that cloud protections by sending sample submissions up to the Defender service just to see detonation and analysis. If it looks like it's a questionable executable, it'll send it up there. You also have block at first sight, where if it sees an executable running, it goes to that cloud-based protection, looks at the heuristics, and determines if it's a threat. It'll shut it down immediately. Emergency signature updates. So if there's a 0-day, which Defender does a great job of protecting the posture of the machine to where the definition updates aren't as critical, but those are still at the core of that Defender antivirus service. You also have the endpoint detection and response capabilities, the attack surface reduction rules, which are built into Windows 10. However, Defender takes it a step further by allowing you to get all of that real-time data. Otherwise, you're having to run a command to dump an XML file and import it into the event log to read through all the logs to see what exactly the service is doing. It's possible, but it's painful. And then the indicators of compromise, looking at the detection, prevention, and exclusion of entities is another piece that's right there at the core of the suite. And the next piece is the attack surface reduction rules. Those are policies that are built in to Windows, such as preventing Adobe from running any malicious processes, the traditional macros in Office, and being able to execute those. There's probably, last I checked, maybe 30, 40 of those now that Microsoft recommends turning them on, or even being able to have, which I just found out about here recently, if you have the Defender connected to the cloud, there's actually a warn mode. So what it will do is it allows someone to turn off one of these attack surface reduction rules, but within a 24-hour period, Windows will automatically turn it back on if you have it connected up to the cloud, which is super cool. This is probably the next piece after you go and enable those sensors that I recommend, just from hardening the stance of your machine. And as you can see, there's a couple of different ways. Within GPO, you can turn it on. That's the most painful method. You can do it through the configuration manager exploit guard policy, which is that additional feature if you may have to turn on within your environment if you haven't already. But that also allows you to set these policies. This is where you also would turn on the network protection, as well as the controlled folder access. Those popcorn flavored Mike and Ike's was asked, as well as the policies within Intune. Those line up very nicely with the configuration manager. However, you're going to see the most recent ones inside of Intune and Endpoint Manager in the cloud first. I've got two more, and then I'll pause for any questions. The fifth one is the automatic investigation. I've got a little chart in the bottom corner that you can see kind of what those different levels of the automatic investigation will actually do based off of, is it a Windows folder? Is it an application folder? Is it a temp folder or other folders? What type of automatic remediation it can do? As you can see, some of those are automatic. Others are more of, hey, let's provide the user a warning to see if there's any breaches. And this is an example of what that would look like from a administrator view. So I'm an administrator. I want to go in and initiate an automated investigation against a machine. This is a capability that no other product has that I'm aware of. What it will actually do is it performs a analysis of a lot of different data points, and then it allows you to download a zip file where you have that investigation package. Up in the top right corner, you can see all of the different data endpoints that it's doing as part of that automated investigation. So it's doing that very rapidly. It's analyzing that information in the cloud. But let's say you as an administrator want to take that a step further to see if there's something from a baseline configuration perspective that is out of place for a particular user's machine. You've got all that data at your disposal. You could spend probably hours combing through it if you wanted to. However, Microsoft's automated investigation to look at the posture of a machine does that a lot quicker and a lot easier. And then finally, that sixth piece really is that managed threat hunting service that you can turn on, and there's two different pieces of it. So there's the targeted attack notification that you can turn on and have it notify your administrators if there is a threat, or there's the concept of the experts on demand. So taking that AI that's built into the Defender suite really to that next level where you're able to interact with that Microsoft Cybersecurity Center and be able to get information and interact with those Microsoft experts is something that is available. However, it's something that you would have to talk to your Microsoft AE to be able to learn more about and to be able to turn that on. So now that we've covered the gamut of what Defender can do, let's serve it up. That's that next piece. So we've pulled it all together. We'll talk about how we'll want to serve it up next. And then let me pause to see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like there's any right now. How about I take a sip of water, see if any pop up, and then kind of move into the next section of actually serving up Defender. So we talked about this a little bit of how we want to deploy it based off of how your systems management processes are within your organization. So assessing your infrastructure is important. Assessing the capabilities of your devices in your environment is important. Granted, I've seen this work all the way down to, I actually have a Windows 7 box that I've deployed Defender to. It's definitely not as smooth as Windows 10, 11, Server 2019, but it does work. And it does require the MMA agent for log analytics. So to work there, you want to actually also look at application compatibility. Now, traditionally, antiviruses, we would back in the day, and I like to say that now because Defender it uses that AI to look at the behaviors of a device. We put in exclusions. We build exclusion lists. I've still gone into customer projects where they are, saying, "Do we need to take all my exclusions and pump it into the cloud?" And I say, "No, you shouldn't have to do that." EDR is smart enough to look at the device behavior, how it's interacting with the machine to determine if it's a threat. And if it's an application that you're using, and granted you don't have controlled folder access on, that's where you have to have whitelists, it should work just fine. You should be able to install applications unless it's trying to do something malicious. It stays in the background and just is providing you that next level of protection on the machine. And so choosing that right architecture is important. This might be your opportunity as an organization to say, we are on XYZ management platform. We are using ConfigMan, and this is our opportunity to take that first step into that modern management path, being able to do autopilot, etc. This is a great first step in providing you that level of protection on your machines, as well as being able to take you down that modern management path. So in terms of looking at it from a configuration management perspective, you can still set up that installation package within ConfigMan. You can onboard the devices into Intune is the other component. I do have customers that they're not ready to make that step into Intune, and they are just happy with ConfigMan as it is, and it makes it really easy to turn it on within that suite as well. Obviously, pushing out the devices, the onboarding is kind of that third step. There's an evaluation tutorial that you can walk through to do simulations. There's a really cool site too that has a number of different attack scenarios that you can run against your device to kind of look at the health. I've actually even have customers that have gone through entire attack simulations, and just the timeline, the multi-stage event logging that it does is really cool. To be able to look at what all it's seeing on the device as an attack happens and what it's doing to prevent it. And then once you've gone through and served it up and you've done your enterprise rollout and your pilot, that's really the next step is being able to push it out into your environment. So, looking at pilot users is key. Procuring the licensing and knowing what the right licensing level that you'll need is important. Choosing that Intune managed workload is next. Setting up internet-based devices for Config Manager is kind of that fourth step if you are using ConfigMan as your deployment method, and then kind of pushing it out to devices would be that method for Configuration Manager. Then you would set up the Microsoft Defender Security Service, connect Intune and Defender, connect Configuration Manager and Intune, onboard devices through ConfigMan or Intune, and then run that test connectivity. So this is really those, as we look at it from a 10,000-foot view, these are the high-level steps. This is where we really get into really that 100-foot process of if I'm doing a deployment as an IT organization or working with a customer, these would be kind of those next steps that we would have to be able to do the deployment. But one of the other big questions, and this is when I've done this discussion, this is where usually there's the most questions, is what licensing level will I need to run Defender for Endpoint? And so Microsoft has done some changes here recently, which is really awesome in terms of breaking it into kind of the P1 and the P2 suite. The P1 suite now is actually included with your M365 E3 or A3 licensing. So being able to get a lot of those capabilities, SANs, some of the items that you kind of see here at the bottom, some of the EDR, automated detection and response, threat and vulnerability management, threat intelligence, the sandboxing and the threat experts, which is kind of that extra cost feature. Those are the items that you would need to step up to the P2 or get the E5. Otherwise, everything else that you see here at the top is included with your E3, which is it was a huge announcement. I think it was back in October when that came out, because now it enables a lot more organizations to start onboarding and being able to get some of that data into the cloud and being able to provide some of that extra level of protection using that Defender suite. Pause and see if I've got any other questions. None at the moment. Everyone's still good? All right.
Yep, still good.
Perfect. So let's talk about the different deployment styles as well as the caveats. So PC, probably the easiest is really through the endpoint manager. If you're already an Intune organization, really it's turning on that connectivity and pushing out your first endpoint protection policy is going to be the easiest method. If you're using configuration manager, you can get the configuration file as well as your tenant ID and use that as a mean to onboard your devices. You probably have even seen that script for deployment for up to 10 machines, and I'll talk about why you don't want to use that. And this, a lot of the information that comes from this deck comes from Jake Maurer, who is also very active in the Defender Reddit group. He's one of the customer acceleration team program managers. And so as I was putting together this presentation, I was like, I want to hear what you're seeing from customers as those caveats. And the big thing is there's a registry key that may lead to performance issues, because that script is only meant for testing, right? So signaling the machine to send data as quickly as possible. So yeah, granted, you'll send that data a lot quicker, but you can see performance issues on machines if you use that onboarding script. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, right. You know, when we said there's no questions, 3 popped up. Of course. Leaf wants to know if you can discuss licensing servers. And I think we also wanted to understand, like, what is it per server per month? And then when they deployed a year ago, there was only user-based licensing.
Yes, so it's, for servers, I believe you need a minimum of 50 licenses to be eligible to get the server licenses. But a lot of, and I'll actually wait to hold the rest of this question to when we get to the server section, because that's when we want to start looking at that Defender for Cloud suite that used to be Azure Security Center. That's part of where the server story goes. So I'll cover that in a little bit. For servers, it's not that much, right? As Microsoft has enabled more capabilities for servers as part of the 2012 R2, the 2016 package that they just updated, as well as the native capability in 2019 and now 2022. There's a lot of capabilities that stand part to part with what you would see inside of the Windows 10 suite. So there's some great pieces there for servers. And yes. So a year ago, they as they moved into that supportability for the server suite and kind of having that one pane of glass, so to speak, to look at the Defender health for all your endpoints, server is a piece of it as well. Actually had a customer essay, hey, how come I see my server, I see my domain controllers in Defender? And it turns out that they were sending some of their event log data from their domain controllers up to Sentinel. And to do that, you have to have the Microsoft monitoring agent, which I'll get to in just a few minutes. There's a lot of really great information that's coming up next around servers that I'll touch on. And so the next one here is detecting those capable devices. You want to leave it to standard. And so what this does is the devices themselves will actually do discovery on the network. So it kind of pings and looks at other devices nearby to determine if they should be onboarded. So if you have some devices in your environment that don't have sensor data, they don't have the sensor installed, you might see those in your portal because Microsoft has done some discovery. It's that feature of leaving it in standard. So it's an important one, just so you have an idea of, are there any devices in your environment that aren't your devices, or maybe ones that still need to be onboarded. So it kind of does that health check. Keep the platform updates enabled. It's an AV definition class and config manager. And then from a network protection perspective, if you're using browsers other than Edge integrates really nicely with the Defender story. I still have a lot of organizations I work with that even some have just finally made the move 100% to Chrome and got off of IE, which is going to be sunset in 6 months. So in order to have those third-party browsers, you do need to have exploit protection turned on, which is essentially the, you can't read it very well. I did not pick a very good font color, but it's enable network protection. With that enabled, then it will pull the data from the Defender for Endpoint portal to read if you have set up and blocked. And then the cloud protection and tamper protection, those are components as well that you want to get turned on as quickly as possible as part of that PC story. Looks like there was a question here. If we deployed via the onboarding script, it is also possible to undo the registry key. I would probably use the offboarding script first and then push it out through a configuration tool such as Configuration Manager or through Intune. So definitely a great question. If you do need to remove a device, I definitely would recommend having that uninstall script published as an application to use at your disposal. So let's talk quickly about mobile. With mobile, It's also really easy. If you have devices that are company owned and managed and using Intune, you can turn on the Intune connection and have it push out the mobile client and capabilities to iOS and Android very easily. And then from a manageability perspective, it's easy to publish that application through the app stores. It didn't used to be that way. It's something that's improved within the last 6 months as well. With that capability, however, and this kind of takes us down that road of what's really a company managed device, how you want to do MAM versus MDM. In this case, I would see this as MDM for company devices, because when you turn this on, built web protection is built in. That is also what facilitates that Microsoft tunnel connectivity now. And so the only caveat to this is, last I checked, it cannot be disabled. So if you do have that Defender antivirus pushed to your mobile devices, that capability is going to be turned on natively. But the nice thing is it does allow that web protection, very similar to what you would see on your PC platforms as well. For mobile caveats, again, I mentioned it twice. I will mention it one more time. This is where you really want to think about your user personas. If you have a BYOD policy where users can connect up to your Microsoft 365 environment, MAM is in containerization is the best route. You can still protect your data, but you stay out of all of the legal caveats when it comes to having your company oversee a device that you don't own. So definitely keep that in mind for corporate devices. When you enroll, as of now, at last I checked, you still need to have a user open the app and sign in. It doesn't do it automatically. So you will have to have that communication to your corporate managed device users that they will need to open that up just to sign in. The VPN for the mobile has to be enabled. I actually have this set up on my 10-year-old's phone, and when he turns that off, it turns off all of his internet. So it's a nice safeguard, but something to keep in mind. You will see that little VPN icon turned on because it will tunnel that connectivity. And then from the perspective of managing those block sites, IP addresses, etc., you can do that for your mobile devices, and that's done through the Cloud Security Center to be able to manage those, as well as taking advantage of your MCAS/Defender for App Story of sanctioned and unsanctioned apps. Everything that's managed there in that centralized portal flows down to the devices as well. And it looks like there was a comment, found that device discovery feature was showing devices connected to users' home networks and their Wi-Fi. Yes, if you are doing that, if you have forced VPN connections, having that enabled, I'll be honest, I see more noise than I do not, right? You're seeing all these devices that are showing up in your portal, and you may not even be able to onboard them. So that's a very good point to keep in mind. It's nice to go into an environment and maybe not know what you have. It's great to be able to do. There's some network manageability perspectives and discovery you can do too, to have Defender look for printers and switches and use SNMP to be able to get into those devices and look at the device security. So there's some real world applications, but I don't see a lot of organizations using it just yet. Great question. Servers, let's talk about servers. This is probably one of the hottest areas right now in working with organizations here at Concurrency that I'm seeing is onboarding servers and moving off of third-party antiviruses across their fleet. And that's where, and now I didn't update the branding, my apologies on this, but the Azure Defender, or Defender for Cloud now is that capability that is recommended. So having that connected to the cloud, I think there was something in the ballpark of how you can enable some of that advanced capability within Azure is a component that is part of that server story, right? And we've got the Defender component where we can have antivirus, but having that cloud-based connectivity where you can manage the patching, the health, etc. A lot of that is in that Defender for cloud story. And so in looking at that story, it allows you to do a lot of that adaptive malware and application controls. It allows you to extend that story to more of your data center now, such as Linux, which is one we'll talk about, and allows you to protect from some of those threats. One of the things I did want to call out, and I'll come back to this slide here in a moment, but with the server deployments, to be able to have some of the older operating systems supported, you do have to have that Microsoft management agent. So that's that log analytics component that would need to be deployed on 2008. And it was 2012 and 2016 up until October. But now they've got the new agent that operates and onboards just like Windows 10, Windows 11 for OS's 2012 R2 and higher, which is, well, I'll talk about that process here in just a second. One of the things to call out for those older operating systems is you do have to have that customer experience and diagnostic telemetry component deployed to the older OSs. You do have to have, at least at a minimum, February 2018 monthly update rollup, .NET Framework 4.5 or later. So there were some pretty beefy caveats with the classics, as I'd like to put it, as well as to have that antivirus capability. You did have to deploy SCEP previously. So if you weren't in Configuration Manager shop, that was something that was a little troubling to get access to. So that provided you some of that classic connectivity. But now let's talk about the Microsoft Defender for antivirus and some of that capabilities that now is supported with 2012 R2 and 2016, where it will allow a lot of additional capabilities. Before, it was just antivirus. Now you see a lot of the capabilities like next-gen protection, some ASR rules, and so forth, that you'll actually be able to see if you onboard one of those operating systems with that new script that is in the portal. And you'll even be able to do things like collect investigation packages, live response, antivirus scans, something that wasn't capable 2 months ago. So really nice capabilities in terms of some of those pieces that you get now with that server suite. And I did actually, one other scenario that I had seen is environments where they have data centers that weren't connected. One of the things that we would see is deploying that log analytics gateway into their environment to kind of act as a forwarder. The downside is that is no longer supported with that new agent. So there are methods to deploy to servers in an offline mode. However, you're going to lose a lot of that real-time capabilities if you have those with no internet connection. So being able to have that connectivity up to the cloud, at least through a Microsoft controlled IP or whitelisted range, is pretty important as well. And so some of the caveats, there's a little bit of a laundry list. So the onboarding that log analytics monitoring agents will show devices in MDE. There are some prereqs for older OSs. Caveat, time to upgrade some of those devices potentially. That preview agent does have some limitations, and there is no UI. It's all PowerShell to manage those servers. Server 2016 doesn't have passive mode. You'll need to remove the Defender feature. So don't try to change the registry key like you would do in 2019. 2019 onboards in 2022, just like Windows 10. You have the script, it goes through, turns on all the capabilities. And with 2019, and I haven't tested with 2022, it's probably the same. In order to put it in passive mode, it has to be done manually through a series of registry keys. I'll pause here to see if there's any more questions. From a pricing perspective, if you're doing the Defender for Cloud, I know there's the different levels. I think there's like a standard and kind of a step up. I thought I saw, you know, maybe the standard is 5 or 10. I think the advanced one is a little bit more. For those of you that were classic OMS shops, it's essentially the same. And if you've been using OMS, it pretty much is using that same licensing style for being able to provide some of those advanced capabilities. Macs. With the Mac install, it's gotten a lot easier, but there's still some things you'll want to do, kind of like pushing policies to a device through Intune or Configuration Manager. You do the same thing for Macs in order to make sure that Defender has the ability to access the disk, kernel extensions, notifications, and onboarding would be kind of that last piece. So there's you know, inside of this deck, which I'll be happy to share after this presentation, there's a number of links to help you see where some of those scripts are and how to easily deploy them. As you can see here, there's configuration files to deploy as well as scripts to build those out. One of the new things to keep in mind with the most recent version of the client is it's gotten a lot easier to configure the suite from the command line, just like you would do with PowerShell on Windows. And if you don't want to use the command line, and maybe let's say you're doing Jamp to manage your devices, you can actually push down a preference file, and Microsoft has their guidance on how to do the Defender for Endpoint integration with Jamf as well. And then finally, let's talk about Linux. Just because a growing number of environments do have it within their data center. And there's a number of steps that's involved here too, getting the zip file from the Microsoft portal, extracting the script file, making sure you have Python, giving Python permissions, configuring the Microsoft install stores, and then once you do the install, within about 3 to 5 minutes, you'll start to see that it is checking in with the cloud. And as you can see here, there's a quick and easy little command to get the health status, as you can see over on the right-hand side as well. So it gives you a brief rundown of how it's operating and how it's configured as well. And so from a caveat perspective, there is possible that you may have other antiviruses depending on what's in your environment, but you don't want to run them both at the same time in Linux, because you can see FA notify collisions, and you may even see kernel panics. So something to keep in mind if you are looking at Linux is make sure you don't have Defender running with another product. You can set it to auto update, but when you had that, it used to be it would do a quick scan. That's something now you can change within the configuration file, where you can set that to false. And one thing as well to keep in mind, that some of the instances of Linux that we see are very tiny, and make sure that those tiny instances have enough resources to be able to support Defender for Endpoint. In closing, we went through the whole deployment story, all the different pieces. You get all of your endpoint security, one savory meal. The Defender product is definitely a formidable competitor. If you look in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, they are they're definitely right there with CrowdStrike. They're neck and neck, and so there's a lot of pieces that now, if you are an E3 customer, that you are going to get with that suite, as well as the pieces that are in E5. So definitely keep that in mind. Once again, a big thank you to Jake Maurer at Microsoft for his invaluable input to pulling a lot of this information. As well, there's 2 go-to resources I highly recommend if you are going down that Defender story route. First one is the Reddit page. That's actually how I found Jake. I found him through that blog on Reddit as well, talking about blogs. Yang Ri, he is one of the go-to guys in the community. I think he actually is an engineer at Microsoft. I think he's a PFE, but his blog has got a phenomenal amount of information. There's just this presentation seems like a lot, but it's really just a scratch compared to what's out there on Young's blog. So, and in closing, any questions from the community? Let's see. So it looks like we've got one that says, have you seen issues with defenders on Macs with developers that use IDE tools? I have not encountered that. The environments typically that have it, I know they have a small environment. Most of them are doing development. Here's what I'd recommend. Go out to the Reddit and post that question, and Jake will respond. I guarantee it. He's pretty on top of any community questions. It can help you get to the bottom of it. So you can get insider help without having to open a support ticket. All right. Any others? Let's see. And it looks like I've got 2 minutes to spare. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Michelle,
that
you
was
still
pretty
there?
incredible timing, I must say.
Yeah.
We're on time.
Wasn't
This is like the
intentional.
first time in the entire year that we are following the exact guide from our agenda.
And it's the last one of the year, so you have to start all over in January.
Yeah, we'll be making more mistakes next year.
Yes, I'll get the couple little pieces of product names updated, and then I'll send you a link, Michelle, and you can circulate this out to the community.
All right, that'd be fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So now we're going to move into the survey phase. But please, Chris, would you put in your blog post into the chat?
Oh, sure. I don't have it done yet around the attack service reduction rules. I'll probably have it within the next day or so. But yes, I will fully intend to include that with that link as well.
Perfect. That sounds great. Yeah, anytime, we can connect you back to people who might have questions or to learn more information, all the better. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, so I did put the link in there. It looks like we do have quite a bit of people still on. Basically, the survey, if you came in kind of later or after our event had started and you're new to the group, we do have 2 giveaways, each $100 gift card to Amazon. So soon as you fill out that survey, what we do is we go ahead and put it in kind of a magical thing that picks a couple of the people. And we will call out, I guess, some board members maybe on our team to ask for numbers based on the number of people who have surveyed. So we'll go ahead. It's kind of our randomizer, if you will. And let me go ahead, I guess, and ask anyone if there's any questions that you might have. And I'm going to share my screen again, too, just to let you know we do have our next meetings the second Monday of every month. So the next one is January 10th. So if that's something, we are going to be posting our speakers. Like everyone, we try to be as planful as we possibly can, but we also know that speaker schedules can change. And so we're trying to put speakers at least 3 months ahead of time, so you can plan your time around what we have going on. But we also want to learn from you in the surveys. What is it you're working on, so we can plan accordingly and get the speakers that are focused on the topic areas that you really truly care about. So please put as much information in the survey on how we can help you, what you want to learn more about. And of course, go out to our YouTube channel, subscribe to that, because that's where you might already see a session that we've already posted throughout the year. Basically, what we try to do for as much as possible is kind of combine our collaboration, our security and compliance, communication, automation, all kinds of different topics, if you will, into our monthly user group sessions. And then, of course, we have our biannual workshop day. That's an all-day event, usually about 25 sessions in all. And that's really a great place to learn. Like I said, go out to our YouTube channel. I believe it might be in our chat that I put it out there. And that, you might have to scroll up quite a bit, but that's going to have the recordings that we've had over, I'd say, since we've started being virtual. They're either on our website, so MN365.org, at the actual event when you go into past events. But we're starting to move them into a YouTube channel, just a central location, to make it a whole lot easier for you. As we know, YouTube is kind of where everybody's going today for recording and so forth. All right, did I share my screen? I don't believe I did, so let me go ahead and do that. All right, and if you do not have the link, go out to mn365.org/survey. That is the link. Every single month, we just change out the Microsoft form to replace that link. And are there any more questions? Here's that snapshot again. This is the M365 events around us. I did post all of these, but just to take a look at them again, great information, and wanted you to at least see what's going on out there. And as you know, we have kind of a plethora of MVPs and SMEs that are out there putting together information for all of you to consume, to get better at what you're trying to accomplish. I think that's kind of the ultimate goal. That's how I've learned a lot about how to use Power Automate and manage M365 and so forth. All right, let me ask, is Doug Wilson on the call? Okay, not yet. He's coming right now. Basically, as you're filling out the survey, he's going to just check to see how many have filled it out. Let me ask in the room with the raised hand feature if you still need more time. All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. We definitely have time. We have another 25 minutes. So, I think we're as punctual for the first time as ever. We might all cut out early, which would be fantastic. I'll go ahead. I'll actually go forward one more slide so you can see the YouTube channel URL. And Doug Wilson, are you on?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Thank
Awesome.
you. Appreciate you being able to jump in and help us out.
Always.
I think there is one person still doing the survey, but do you want to go ahead and just do a tally and let me know how many have filled it out?
Yeah, we are at 48. Okay. Let me count correctly, 48.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly wait as long as people need to fill it in because we really value that information. Just to share with you, a lot of what we do at the user group is based on what you actually put in that survey. So when we're done with our monthly meetings, as a board of 9 of us, we meet and we review the surveys and we look for what new topics and how well was the presentation and who wants to sponsor and who wants to speak. And we run through all of that. And then we brainstorm maybe who could be doing those topics. And so it's really just super helpful for us, especially as you're, going down the, Microsoft 365 stack and maybe rolling out new things like shifts or bookings, or you have no idea what tasks are or planner or to do. And so we've been doing a lot of that, but I definitely, because being a customer of Microsoft for so long, I'd love to know what solutions you're building. And if you are wanting to talk about them, scenarios that worked well within your organization, things that were actually really valuable that changed, how you maybe are deploying or training or communicating or whatever the case might be. If you are willing to share with us, and maybe the whole hour is too much, but if you are willing to share, let us know that too, because we are always interested. That's how we figure things out, right? Is we learn from each other. And so, I can usually listen to someone and go, oh, I can take a part of that, or maybe I can take the whole thing, or maybe they're willing to work with me and I can reach out to them. So that's really what our user group is for. normally, you know what we'd do? We'd go and have happy hour after our user group, or we would talk over our, you know, eating pizza back in Edina and the MTC. So that's, you know, that networking is so important. So we will, you know, keep on trying to do that through our survey, but, you know, we are always open to everyone coming off mute, going on camera, chatting. So, you know, if that's of interest, just let us know. All right, one more time. Let's go. How does anyone else please raise your hand or let me know in the chat if you need more time on the survey. All right, Doug, I think we've got everyone in there.
All right, I will just ask for a number from, I think it's 1 to 51.
All right, sounds good. I'll throw it in the randomizer. And Chris Blackburn, can you come off mute and give me a number 1 through 51?
33.
Perfect. And Doug, 33?
All right, I have Robert Modé or Modé.
Robert, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. $100 gift
Congrats,
card
Robert.
to spend on you.
Thank you.
Christmas. All right, thank you. Well, we'll get your email address and be sure to get that mailed to you. Some things to note about when we buy it and send it to you, of course, what happens is it goes through your email scanner and it may sit in junk. So always remember that if you folks win something at any given time from our user group, let us know, or first maybe look in your junk and then let us know and we'll get it sent out to you again. All right, so Doug, 1 through 51, we've already had 33. Chris, will you call out another number?
Sure, let's go with 17.
All right, 17.
Let me find that. Oh man.